Hi everyone. As promised, a short screencast on how to blind a paper for peer review. So I'm using a paper that I published a couple of years ago to show you how I blind my papers. Before we start, just a couple of quick points on what blind peer review is, if this is a new concept to you. So there's three different kinds of peer review. There's single blind, double blind, and open. Open is more common in the sciences, and it's starting to gain some traction. It is what it sounds like. Everybody knows who everybody is, reviewers and author, and often the peer reviews are published with the final paper in open peer review. But most journals still use double-blind peer review, which means that the reviewers don't know who the author is and the author doesn't know who the reviewers are. So the reason that they do this is to try and make the process as objective or transparent as possible, so that you don't get, for example, a reviewer who has sexist ideas about women publishing in the sciences, seeing a woman's name on a paper and then immediately being negative about the paper from the get-go. Or you don't see an author who has racist ideas about black women or black men publishing in their particular field, and they see a black person's name, or what they assume would be a black person's name, and they immediately then want to sort of pick apart their English or pick apart their ideas, right? So those kinds of biases are, why would we think they wouldn't be part of peer review when they are deeply part of academia? So as far as possible, we try and make peer review as fair as it can be. This doesn't always work, but we do try. So according to the most recent guidelines from Wiley-Blackwell, from Elsevier, and also from Oxford University Press, this is the latest advice on how to blind a paper. So the first thing that a reviewer should see when they open a paper is absolutely no details that identify you as the author. So ordinarily in a paper for publication, you would have a name here, right? You would maybe even have an affiliation. You would maybe have a contact address, and you would maybe have an ORC ID. I don't know what my ORC ID is off by heart, so I can't type it in here. But you wouldn't have any of this in a blinded paper. You take that away so that all the reviewer would see, all the editors would see on this version of the paper would be the title, the abstract, and the keywords, right? Now, they used to advise you when you blinded papers to replace your name and the name of co-authors, if there were any, with author and other, or author and others, if there was more than one co-author. Now, they no longer say that. They say what you should do is put your references in the text, but ensure that where you have referred to them, you are referring to them in the third person so that they read very much like any other reference you would be including. So, for example, you wouldn't say, as we have argued elsewhere. You would say, as Clarence and Dyson have argued elsewhere, because then it's much harder for reviewers to identify Clarence as the author of this paper as well as Clarence as the author of the other paper that she's citing, right? So here's another one. Where I have included a reference to another paper that I've written that's that has the same basic kind of thrust and argument of this paper. So you can see it says, while this may not be ideal, structured support within their departments and disciplines offered throughout the academic year would be preferable. So here, I can actually refer to myself as Clarence 2016 because I'm not saying as I have argued, right? I'm putting myself in with a whole bunch of other people who've made the same kind of argument, and I'm trying to really build on the argument that I've made in this other paper, because there are not that many people who do research in South Africa on developing tutors yet. The field is growing, right? So then there's one more thing which I want to show you, which is that the other thing they advise you to do is to remove the names of institutional affiliations, right? So here, oh, okay, I haven't gone far enough in the paper yet. Okay, so here I've said in the methodology that this research has been done at a mid-sized traditional South African university. Now, I could take out South African, and I could replace it, for example, more broadly with in the global South, or I'm not entirely sure how I would move that for peer review, to be honest. I don't necessarily think that this is going to be too much of a problem for reviewers, because there are several mid-sized traditional South African universities in this country, and it's impossible to tell whether I'm talking about a historically advantaged or historically disadvantaged. If I had said this was done at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa, and people knew that this was sort of classed as a historically black university or historically disadvantaged institution, although there's some debate as to whether or not it is still one, that might bias peer reviewers against me. But saying a mid-sized traditional South African university probably wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing. Or if you said this study was done at a university of technology or a former technicon, if that's vital to your findings, then you need to mention that, but you need to try and do it in a way that doesn't name the university or name the institution. I've named faculties because that doesn't necessarily bias anybody against my study, and it's useful information for the readers. And then the final thing I wanted to show you is here I've said as argued elsewhere. Now I could have said as I have argued elsewhere and then put in Clarence 2016, but then you'll know that it's me, right? So I could just take as argued elsewhere what is needed. Now, you may say, oh, but then it's kind of giving away that it's you that's written this. So how might I do that then to blind it? What I could do is I could say, what is needed is, move this to the end of the sentence, and then I could actually say, see, for example, Clarence 2016, right? So here, I would then turn that into what is needed. And you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, this is the author of this paper. You would just think, oh, okay, the author of this paper is just citing another paper that gives an example of what is needed, and she's building on that argument or reinforcing that argument, right? So this is generally speaking how we blind papers. And then, of course, you wouldn't actually have author in the references. You would simply have the full reference in alphabetical order in the reference list where it's supposed to go, because you have made it clear in the paper that it isn't you that you're talking about. It's just another researcher whose work you're citing. Now, the trickier thing is if you're doing this in a very niche field where you are one of maybe a handful of researchers doing this, then especially if you have a very distinctive voice, as some of my colleagues, for example, in writing centers in South Africa have, even if they blind their paper, I can almost always tell who it is. So there's some debate about the extent to which we really can actually blind our research, but we do need to try as far as possible to draw attention to our argument and not to our identity in peer review, because then we end up potentially with situations where peer review is less than fair and less than transparent and less than ethical. And that's really what we're trying to avoid with blinding our research. I'm including some links under the video to a couple of very short articles that you can go and have a look at on some of the basic principles of blinding a paper. And I'm hoping that these will be helpful to you as you prepare your papers for publication.